Hujambo, Espresso Talk Today community. It's Robin here. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very uncommon conversation. Today, the Espresso Talk Today team is meeting with Dr. Howard Stevenson from the Racial Empowerment Collaborative. This was our first meeting with Dr. Stevenson, and the ETT team had a lot of questions. Fortunately, Dr. Stevenson was gracious enough to spend considerable time addressing and answering these questions for us. Dr. Stevenson brings a wide range of knowledge and experience to this conversation about racial literacy and how to handle racially stressful encounters and moments. So we're going to tap into that knowledge and experience as much as time permits. Ben and Mel will arrive in just a minute, and then we'll get started. But while we wait, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Howard Stevenson. Dr. Howard Stevenson is the Constance Clayton Professor of Urban Education, Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Yes, that is my alma mater too. Dr. Stevenson is the Executive Director of the Racial Empowerment Collaborative, which is a research program development and training center that brings together community leaders, researchers, authority figures, families, and youth to study and promote racial literacy and health in schools and neighborhoods. Dr. Stevenson is the recipient of the 2020 Gittler Prize by Brandeis University for outstanding and lasting scholarly contributions to racial, ethnic, and religious relations. Since 1985, Dr. Stevenson has served as a clinical and consulting psychologist working in impoverished rural and urban neighborhoods across the country. Finally, on a separate note, I want to mention Dr. Stevenson's book, Promoting Racial Literacy in Schools, Differences That Make a Difference. This is a thought-provoking and powerful research for educators, parents, and anyone interested in learning how to handle racial stress. Again, the book is called Promoting Racial Literacy in Schools, Differences That Make a Difference. Okay, no, you don't need to write down the name of the book now. I'm going to repeat it after the show. And I might even read a paragraph or two from it because I found wisdom, insights, and practical information on every page of the book. And that's no lie. You're probably thinking the same as I am. Wow. Yes, Dr. Howard Stevenson has done and is continuing to do extraordinary research and work in teaching young people how to handle racially stressful encounters. And we've learned how racial stress and living in an anti-Black environment can affect mental and physical health. That's why it's so important to address these issues in young people and to give them tools to handle these situations because we know they're going to face them. And we're so glad that you're here with us to learn about this from such an experienced, knowledgeable, and committed person like Dr. Stevenson. Okay, I'm going to stop here. You can hear it all for yourself. If you're part of the Black community in the United States or abroad, I know that you'll recognize the experiences and stress that Dr. Stevenson will discuss, and you might even be surprised and especially interested to learn about ways to identify racial stress and trauma. People of other races will learn about the real stress and trauma of living in an anti-Black environment and perhaps even learn ways that they can be effective allies to Black friends and to their Black family members. Look, we have a great and uncommon conversation for you today. Spoiler alert, this is the first part of the conversation. We will continue and conclude this conversation next week, and you definitely don't want to miss that. Well, Ben and Mel have just arrived, so sit back, relax, grab an espresso, and let's get started. Hey Mel, hey Ben.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. And you?
Yeah,
I'm doing terrific.
it's good to see both of y'all again.
Great, yeah, and you too. You too, and you can see that I am having an espresso with a very special guest. This is Dr. Howard Stevenson.
Wow. Boy, how lucky we are to be here at this time.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Stevenson.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Well, let's just give a brief introduction, so that, I can see that you're pretty thrilled to meet Dr. Stevenson, as we all are. But I'll just say, Dr. Stevenson is the Constance Clayton Professor of Urban Studies and a Professor of Africana Studies, as well as, I find it very interesting too, the Director of the Racial Empowerment Collaborative. He's based at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And I will say, full disclosure, I am a Penn grad myself at the law school. So, well, Dr. Stevenson, the Espresso Talk Today team has been on a real quest. It didn't start off this way, but it's turned into a quest to understand and learn how to deal with systemic and individual racism, or basically how to live while Black in America. Though, of course, the United States is not the only place where racism is a prevalent feature of the society. But during our quest, we have learned how racism is a public health crisis, how it affects Black mental and physical health and well-being. And recently, we learned about racial battle fatigue with an incredible psychologist and how it causes a persistent stress reaction in our bodies that we might not even be aware of, but that are actually affecting our systems, our bodies. And we also learned about John Henryism from an amazing epidemiologist who discussed how the high effort coping strategies that we use to deal with racism can cause wear and tear on our bodies, leading to early onset morbidities and sometimes even early death. We have really learned a lot. We know there's so much more to learn. And we're particularly interested in coping strategies, healthy coping strategies, though, of course, it's important to know which strategies are maladaptive as well. So we want to deal with racism that we face on a daily basis. Microaggressions nearly everywhere, experienced one just today. Adultification of our children, bias, violence, and even the disregard of our concerns by people who claim to be anti-racist. I remember Professor William Smith recently said that in our bodies are great lie detectors. And we might be feeling that things are okay, but our body is probably telling us something differently. And this is why I'm so happy to meet you, Dr. Stevenson, to tell us, to discuss how to resolve racially stressed situations or encounters and to stay healthy mentally and physically. So welcome to our uncommon conversation. And thank you for joining us today. But we have a lot to unpack here. Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Yes.
And we have a lot to unpack here. So we should get started because we do want to understand your work and the program, and we want to see it applied in real life, racially stressed encounters. And we're going to be bringing some stuff to the table. But first, Dr. Stevenson, I've heard you say this African proverb, which I absolutely loved, and it maybe gave me ideas, but I want to hear from you that the lion's story will never be told as long as the hunter is the one to tell it. You said it in different contexts. What does this proverb mean to you?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm delighted to be here. And the way that you have prepared this conversation is very powerful. So thank you. I actually meant it when I heard it, and it was given to me my first year at Penn, which was 32 years ago. And it was actually at a time when I was considering giving up the professorship because I thought I could be, in my first year, the kind and gentle colleague to my white colleagues, knowing that they might be threatened by my race and also by my topic that I wanted to study, does it matter when parents talk to their kids about race? And this proverb was very helpful when I was disillusioned. And the disillusionment was that I had come across people who just didn't appreciate my culture, my people, my style of talk. And so this proverb, the lion's story will never be known as long as the hunter's the one to tell it, was saying to me, not only that my story matters, but that also I could look at other people trying to define me as that's not my story. And so it means to me that everybody has a racial story. Everybody's racial story is important and powerful. My racial story is not better than yours, and yours is not better than mine. But there is a caveat, which is to say, I can't blame anybody to the left or the right if I don't know my racial story, right? There's a way in which every story is important and powerful, but if I haven't excavated it, if I don't know the tragedies and the triumphs, I can't benefit from that racial story, and it's up to me to fight for it. And that's what that narrative, and it gave me the resolve to be coming back to Penn and doing the work that I wanted to do, even if people didn't get my story straight. But I had to make sure to speak on it if they got it wrong.
Mhm.
That really, really helps. And I do have a follow-up on that too. Do you feel that the hunter is always trying to tell the lion story? Because I kind of feel that way sometimes, being the lion.
Well, it's funny about, and I think this is the beauty of African proverbs, in that there's so many different ways people can take from it. And one of the ways I think about it is that, yeah, there's somebody who could be trying to tell your story incorrectly, and they could be a hunter. But I also could be a hunter in the sense, in a both and world. Is it possible that I too could be the hunter for someone else, so that I could be the lion and the hunter? Changes the narrative. And from some African perspectives, worldviews, is that, in a both and way, sometimes blessings can be curses, curses can be blessings. That, am I a lion today is the question. And how do I prevent myself from not only not telling my story, but also not distorting other people's narratives?
Mhm.
And so I think that's one way I take the proverb.
Right, thank you.
Wow, that's a very interesting way you frame that, I think. And I think you're right in terms of the way we tend to understand ourselves and others. It's by constructing these narratives. It's like it's not like you're just you, but there's a story of you. And if someone's just putting you in all these boxes and labels, that can be very troubling and stifling. But
Mm-hmm.
I do also have another follow-up question for you, slightly off topic though.
Sure.
So there have been a lot of terms that I've noticed just in your talks and other research, but I don't seem to fully understand them. So, for example, racial literacy, racial socialization, and racial self-efficacy. Could you explain them and how these different concepts fit together?
Mm-hmm. So, racial coping self-efficacy is about the notion of how well do I believe that I can cope or navigate a racially stressful moment. And so, in order to understand that, a racially stressful moment is, in some respects, a moment in which a racial situation, aspect, knowledge comes up, and I feel out of sorts. What Shelley Harrell out of Pepperdine calls, you know, um, I'm overtaxed, and I find myself so overtaxed and overwhelmed that I fail or struggle to regulate my feelings. And most people think stress is about feelings, but it's not just about feelings. It's about my 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 thoughts and my body reaction. So imagine if I'm stressed on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being extremely stressed, 1 not being stressed. It means I'm overwhelmed in regulating my feelings, my thoughts, and my body reactions all in the same time.
Mhm.
And so racial coping self-efficacy is how much do I believe I can manage my stressful self, my stress, the stress of the situation, how other people treat me. So do I have a high belief that I can do it, or do I not really believe that I can do it? And building self-efficacy is part of the work that we do in intervention. Racial socialization is how well do parents prepare their children for racial stressful moments or racial hostility or hate. And I would also add racial uplift, right? How to prepare our children about positive notions about who we are. That's just as important as preparing them for danger. And so part of that includes not only what parents say to children, content, but it also includes what children say to parents. So it's multi-directional. It's not just coming from adults to children. We get socialized about race from social media, from peers, from school policies, from television, from just about anywhere. And some would argue that it's not verbal, it's nonverbal. We watch other people do stuff and that communicates to us. We watch our parents, they don't say, but we see when they're upset, we see when they hesitate. And if that's happening in a racial moment, children can take from that a lesson. And then the other thing you mentioned, racial socialization, and I think I've forgotten the other thing that you mentioned, racial coping self-efficacy, racial socialization. You said one more.
Yes. And the other one was racial literacy.
Okay. So let's say in racial socialization is what parents say to their kids. You have to work twice as hard as a Black person to be thought of as equal as a white person. That's a common statement we get when we talk to families and children. Or you have to be proud to be Black or brown, right? Some parents have protect their children by talking about those things. Some parents, though, protect their children by not talking about those things. They don't want to ruin their childhood. And so even that's a form of socialization, to not talk about race. But what we have learned is that the research on racial socialization is that the more parents talk to their children about race, and we were the first to ask teenagers, what did your parents actually say to you? Because we know sometimes what parents say they say to their children isn't always what children say their parents say to them. But either angle, whatever you look at in the research, whether parents or adolescents are saying, the more you talk about it, the better children end up on indices and measures of academic achievement, academic motivation. Even we know more around sleep benefits from talking about race for third graders to sixth graders. A recent study came out. So from preschool to adulthood, the benefits of talking about race are more likely to be positive than negative or neutral. The problem is that some parents, when they talk to their children about race, they're explicit. Others are not explicit. I joke, my dad would say, look, if you lay down with dogs, you're going to get up with fleas. And we're supposed to figure out the civil rights message in that statement. Dad, what does that mean? We don't have dogs. We got a lot of cats, but we don't have dogs. Anyway, I would never say that to my father. It was always in my mind and under my breath. But that's what was going on in my head. And when we talk to children around, parents say, be proud to be Black. You have to work twice as hard. Those are vague. They're not really helping me when somebody's coming at me in less than 2 minutes. So racial literacy is an attempt to build the skill sets for what you need to do if you only had 2 minutes to make a decision. How much more skillful must I be to navigate a racially stressful moment? And that's where we teach more about how to regulate your emotions when you're overwhelmed, how to use mindfulness when you actually are finding yourself at a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, and your body's going this way, and your thoughts are going that way, and your feelings are someplace else. So that's my quick and dirty version.
Great. Yeah, that's very good description, I think.
Well, that's really amazing to sort all of these out. But how does that fit in what racial stress is and what racial trauma is? Are they different or the same?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to differentiate the two or define them.
One wonderful question, and I think there are multiple ways people try to distinguish. I have generally thought about stress as something that happens if you think about the larger context of this country. We are a country that has failed to resolve the larger tension of race and racial enslavement in this country, which and we've also been very forceful at not talking about it. So we're very skilled at not talking about race, which increases the chances that whenever race comes up, we're going to be bothered by it. And because we were taught, oh my gosh, this is a taboo, or some people are going to get hurt, or I don't know how I'll look incompetent, or people will call me a blank. So racial stress is high, really because of the larger context that we won't really resolve it or talk about it. And this is centuries long kinds of coping. Um, but stress tends to be something that can be immediate. It doesn't linger forever, but it does affect how you function. It affects how you make decisions. If I'm stressed at a high level, I'm not a great decision maker. In fact, Claude Steele talks about in his book, Whistling Vivaldi, A Racing Mind, that if we are in a racial moment, we are so stressed sometimes that our brains will go on lockdown because we're what? We're trying to not say the wrong thing. We're trying to get it right. We're trying not to be called a blank. So if we get to that high level of stress, at an 8, 9, and 10, let's just say, our brain can go on lockdown and we can lose peripheral vision and hearing, right? And if it's a crisis, that's a helpful process. But if it's not a crisis and we're distorting something that's normal, but into a crisis, we have made ourselves really lousy decision makers, right? And so the strategies we propose is, what if we opened up your decision, your left and right visual and hearing possibilities? How much more information, how much better decision maker you are? So stress disrupts decision making, disrupts memory, it disrupts access to memory, but it affects your body and as well as your feelings. Trauma, on the other hand, is what if that sense of stress lingers and doesn't go away? So what Dr. Smith around the battle fatigue, he's a wonderful colleague, has talked about, what if you don't turn that meter off, that you're constantly, over time, it stays with you. That's what we think of as more trauma. And in fact, when you come into a situation that reminds you of something that happened before, it doesn't matter how much longer before, it may trigger you to feel like you're right back there in that scenario. So stress, we think of as more temporary. Trauma, we think of as more persistent, as stress that does not dissipate leads us um, to not forget. Okay.
Stress, I thought stress could be over time, that, eventually, stress could actually cause you to have physical symptoms, like heart issues and hypertension, high blood pressure, things like that. But trauma would be like a one shot thing, a traumatic event happens. But you're saying that's different?
Yes, in the sense that what people do name as an insult to your body, as a traumatic event, is different than the way that I would be using it here around trauma that stays with you.
Mm-hmm.
Prolonged stress, though, can lead to what we think of as emotional lingering trauma, as opposed to a physical assault, which is traumatic to the body itself.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that stress affects and can happen in moments to disrupt a person and also affect their well-being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But you are right that prolonged stress affects cardiovascular health issues, particularly in Black and Brown people, around not just stress, but racial stress is unique in producing or connected to cardiovascular health issues like breast cancer, like a host of issues that we know across the board, from diabetes to different types of cancers and longevity of life.
Yeah.
So would a racial stress be more prevalent in, say, younger than older people, or it's just it doesn't? I mean, it has nothing to do with age.
Has nothing to do with age. In fact, we know that children as young, very young, can pick up when other people feel differently about them. And it doesn't have to just be about what they say, but how they're treated. In the same way that some places use good touch, bad touch to help kids know and report to parents if somebody is not treating them fairly, it is a recognition that children can pick up something that's not right for them, or how they're feeling, or how they're treated. So stress has no respect of age in that regard. And the question is, can we teach people how to notice when they're stressed, right? Because we are also a culture that avoids race it means we are also very skilled to not see when race bothers us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, racial
Wow.
us.
That's go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, back to that. So I'm wondering about these three R's that I've read about this. Yeah, the read, recast, and resolve. So is the reading part then knowing when how you're feeling? Is that the what that part means? Or maybe you can walk me
Partly,
through it rather than just taking it apart like that.
no. It's actually part of the definition of racial literacy is how well can we read, recast, and resolve a racially stressful encounter. Reading is basically, do I see the racial elephant in the room? And that could be the emergency room, that could be the courtroom, that could be the classroom. You pick the room, there's a moment, and some people might see that racial moment, some might not. And let's say you're a teacher in a classroom talking about the Harlem Renaissance, or you're talking about Huck Finn, and the N word shows up.
Mhm.
For some people, that's just an English lesson on Tuesday. For others, though, students of color, this is a very stressful moment, right? Because why? I'm not sure how people are going to talk about this. How is the teacher going to talk about this? So there are levels of racial stress going on. But when we think about reading, some in that class might not notice it. They might not, what's racial about the Harlem Renaissance? And others might see very clearly. So the skill set we try to teach people is how well do you notice when a racial moment happens? Can we build that skill? The answer is absolutely, right? But some families, our society has socialized people to look away, to not talk about it. Those skill sets of reading are going to be lacking for folks who follow those lines of reasoning. So reading is, do I notice what's happening in me? And do I notice what's happening in other people when a racial moment shows up?
But I mean, if you know they're going through Huck Finn and the N word, which is all throughout the book, is brought up, and some people say are feeling uncomfortable, and others are thinking, yeah, literature, you know, time, yes, that was the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is there no objective for objective racial moment? Is it always a subjective thing, a subjective kind of a situation?
Hmm. Well, I think part of the idea of reading though is that we know that this is a racial moment. It is objectively racial, even though I might subjectively not see it. If anybody would want to argue that the use of the N word in Huck Finn is not a racial moment, that would be a hard sell, I think.
Mm.
The question is not whether, as much as it is objective, it's how much do you teach people that it's objective when they've been socialized to believe to avoid anything racial.
Okay, so what if I bring up an incident that happened to me last week? I'm at the
Yes.
department store and I see there are three cashiers. Two of them are white. They're helping people. The other one is, I think she
Mm-hmm.
was Asian. And I knew as soon as I got to the front, I was standing there waiting. I knew when it was my turn that they were not going to help me. And they both, the two white cashiers looked right down and started pretending like they were doing something, like they were writing something. And they were
Yes.
persistent with that. And
Yes.
then as soon as the Asian lady was free, I went to her and I knew it. The other two ladies then all of a sudden they're free, they're available, they take the next people in line. Okay,
Yes.
is that a racial moment or not? I mean, subjectively for me, absolutely, but I can have a friend there who says
Yes.
nah. Okay.
Yes. Well, in the largest sense, it being known as objective is irrelevant. That's what I would say. The
Mm.
question is, what does it mean to you? And back, I think to Melon's point around, if it's stressful for you, that stress is going to affect you, your body, your thoughts, and your feeling. The question is, how stressful? Is it minorly stressful, or is it 8, 9, and 10 stressful? And if that is the case, the question is not will it affect you, it's how much it will affect you. And that's where you were taking notes on, am I remembering this incident from last week or from 2 months ago, or I'm still bothered by it a year later?
Mm.
Then we know that that was not a small thing, even if 10 other people said there was nothing racial about it. So the line story actually means your story is enough. You don't need another person to say that that was racial if you want to get healthy in this particular culture.
Okay, I don't need that external validation because I know when I think about it that I'm still shaking. Well, it doesn't matter what anybody else does. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But you notice that you're shaking, right?
Yeah.
Which is the beautiful thing. It's as sad as it might be, it's also beautiful because imagine if you were shaking and you didn't notice that you were shaking.
Oh, I didn't notice how I was being affected. Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't ask for help and you couldn't get it better. In the same way that anxiety feels like it's not cool to be anxious, but anxiety is still a doorbell letting you know that something ain't right. And that means you can do something about it. If you don't see your anxiety, you can't do anything about it. And that's what reading is really, really about. I didn't answer the rest of your question. Recasting, the second R is, let's say I see the racial elephant in the room and I'm at an 8, 9, or 10. How do I bring that 8, 9, and 10 down to a 5, 6, or 7, right? Because if I stay up here, that's fight, flight, or fright mode. I'm really threatened. Stress at that level is threat. That means it's like facing a tsunami or a poisonous snake. I only got one or two options, either me or the snake.
Right.
5, 6, or 7, that's more impossible, right? 5, 6, or 7 is like climbing a mountain. Challenging, not easy, but not impossible. I can actually climb a mountain. Getting out of a tsunami, not sure I can get out of that.
Yeah.
How do I bring my 8, 9, and 10 down to 5, 6, or 7? And we use recasting method of mindfulness that recasts or reframes the impossible to be possible. So breathing, we call it calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, and exhale. Calculate is what feelings am I having right now? If I'm upset, I'm angry, or I'm sad, at a 7 and a 9, that means I'm noticing that something is happening to me and I can be specific at what feelings it's creating and how intense those feelings are. Calculate. Locate, where in my body do I feel those things? Let's say somebody called me a racial slur. Or let's say in the supermarket where you were, I didn't get served. And let's say you were angry at a 9 and you were sad at a 7 because you expected this treatment. That's calculate. Locate, I'm angry at a 9 that I didn't get served, and I feel it on the back of my neck, like my neck is on fire. That's locate. And I'm sad in my gut, like feels betrayal. I deserve as much treatment in this store, just as like everybody else. 7 of sadness in my gut, and 9 on the back of my neck. That's location. I know not only what I feel, but where it's impacting me. And then communicate is, what do I say to myself when I'm going through the line and I see the other people? I'm saying they're not going to serve me. I think they're not going to serve me. Self-talk. That's how I speak to myself about the moment. And memory is the other part of communication. What memories come back to mind? I might remember when my mother and I and my brother and sister were in the supermarket and they used to throw our mother's food into the bag. That memory I can still see in my head. That's a form of communication. Calculate, locate, communicate. Breathing and exhaling allows my oxygen into my brain so that if I'm blinders on, locked down, like brain lock, oxygen, breathing opens it up. I can see better, decide better. And so that's recasting. And then finally, sorry for the long-winded answer, resolving is just making a socially just decision. After I've thought about it, I noticed it, I know I manage my emotions. Now, can I speak truth to power? Can I make a decision that is an underreaction or overreaction?
Okay, about back to the recasting for a minute. 'Cause Paul and I were talking about that. How do we bring this down to reframe it into something that seems more manageable? Is that being truthful to oneself? I mean, could I say, well, maybe they really did have something else to do, and maybe this wasn't a racial incident at all? Is that denying my feelings? Is that being truthful, to and being honest with myself? So maybe we didn't have that correct, what recasting really is.
Beautiful question. The, these are sometimes, I know in my own head and others, the doubts that we have about, am I right about what I know about myself? But your body also, as you said, that Dr. Smith, a lie detector, right? So what if my body is telling me something isn't right, and I'm trying to tell myself it's not them, it's me? Your body can still, as some wrote, body keeps a score. And so there are ways that we can also figure out if we're lying to ourselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, the doubt, the self-doubt on that. Oh, I'd forgotten about that. Oh boy, that's something. Something's always there. Okay. Yeah. And what did you think, Mel? And you were there too.
I was there, yeah. Well, I was wondering, I mean, in your method to your recast and, calculate, communicate, and feel where this tension is, how long does this take? I mean, is this something you should do within, say, 60 seconds, or we're
Mm-hmm.
still talking about it, she and I, because I was there at the time. As a matter of fact, I was shopping and she was standing in line. She says, I know what's going to happen here. These people are not going to serve me, and I'm just going to stand in line. I said, fine, I'll be over here looking at some other thing. So
Yeah.
how long do we're still, talking about it. So do you resolve it at the moment, or do you carry it with you, or and then resolve it? How do you
Yeah.
Yeah.
do that?
So it's a great question. And I think part of the idea is what do we say to ourselves, whether throughout the process? So if we calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, and exhale during the moment, also, let's say we were over, the moment was past last week, we
Mhm.
can still do the same thing. Let me CLCBE myself now. So if I asked you right now while you're talking about it, for both of you, what do you notice? What feelings do you have now looking back, and how intense are those feelings?
Um, for me, I would say kind of there's some anger, and it's about an 8, and I actually do feel it in my
Okay.
upper back, and kind of my shoulders.
Okay. Now you went to your right shoulder. Do you mean both shoulders or your right shoulder?
I mean both shoulders. Yeah, I could have.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Gotcha. So sometimes people do
Mhm,
mean I feel it right here,
mhm.
and so that's great. You notice where it's any other feeling you have about it.
Um, yeah, disappointment in myself that I didn't do something at the time.
Mhm.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is the disappointment?
Mm, that's about a 7.
7. Great. That's locate. I mean, that's calculate. Where on your body do you feel the anger of an 8? And the where on your body do you feel the disappointment of a 7?
Okay, yeah, the 8, yeah, it's up in my shoulders, upper here, and
Oh,
the
you said
7
it. Okay.
is probably more. Hmm. Actually, may sound strange, but I feel it kind of in my arms. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
And it's both arms or your left arm?
the left arm, left arm.
Okay. All right. So it's not strange to me, but I'm glad you're noticing it, right? Because noticing is a superpower
Mhm.
in the world that's afraid to talk about race. And children can learn it very easily when they can see, oh, I see you're not really talking about race right now. And that means they have a clue as to what's going on in a place that's very mysterious and cloudy. But great, so that's locate. Communicate. Did you say anything to yourself while you were thinking about last week's experience?
Let's see. For now, thinking about last week's. Yeah. Why am I still talking about this? Why don't I just let it go?
Beautiful. Now I'm saying beautiful because you have a very clear sense. Not everybody can capture their self-talk. It's really harder. Um, and any memories that come to mind, any images that come to mind now while you're talking about it, do you see anything?
Uh, I just see the situation, and I actually have I think it's more of a fantasy visualization, like going up there and having a different result. You know. Um,
Right. And so what do you see in your head? Who's there? Are there shopping carts? Are you going back to the store? What images come to mind?
uh, yeah, there are. Uh, it's the three ladies there, and some of the I'm visualizing more of the customers that were around too.
Hmm.
Um, and
Beautiful.
yeah, yeah, and
Um,
yeah, I guess think that's it.
No, no, go ahead.
Um, and I guess like I said, it may be fantasy thing of my going up and changing how I responded, and
Yes.
in a not very friendly way. Yes.
Good, good. So back to Melon's question, which is great. What do you do? Do I deal with it now? Do I deal with it regular? Part of it, I would say, doing this process is necessary before you decide to do anything,
Okay.
because you don't know fully what impact the moment has had on you until you process it. And this is true for any kind of experience. Car accident, you feel fine for 24 hours. Hour 25, you just start walking to your right for no reason. And you say, why is that happening? Right?
Takes time.
Part
Yes.
of it is your brain and your body is preparing you for the jolt,
Mhm.
and in a way, you're not fully sure of what really happened to you. So this process allows us to say, I really thought I was angry at a 4, but I was angry at an 8. And the more I think about it, because why? You're so prepared to be okay,
Mhm.
survive,
Yeah.
never ruffle feathers. And so that's the first coping strategy, to notice, take care of yourself. And you take care of yourself once you know what's happening. Now, the do-over that you describe, if I go back in there, we practice this with folks after they tell their story and say, like, what if you had a do-over? What if you had a second chance? What would you do differently? And how would you go about it? And you started that, Robin, by saying you might go back and say a few words.
Right.
Do you have an idea of what you might say, or how would you describe going back into the store if you had a do-over?
Um, that I, yeah, I would describe my actions as then instead of waiting for the lady that did help me, I would, yeah, I would go to the next one and actually use probably a bad word with them and may even, you know, touch their desk. Or I even then thought too, I would say, you know what you do, you know what you did, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I know. Yeah, I'll get up in her face and do that. Yeah.
Okay. Now you just did it there. How did that feel when you just did it now? On a scale of 1 to 10, how did that feel?
Oh, that felt. I have to say that felt like a great
Mhm.
release. You
Mhm.
know.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
feel really
On a
good. I
scale
would
of 1 to 10, how much relief would you say?
9.
And Melon, you do know Robin fairly well. So would you say
So,
that when she delivered it in the way that she delivered it, did that how she rolls? Is that how she does her when she wants to speak up? Is that her?
oh yeah, yeah, that's definitely that's her. But she wouldn't speak up in a situation like that. But yeah, but
But
yeah.
let's say we're practicing and we're saying she had a do-over and she gets to choose whatever she wants.
Mhm.
Um, would you see that as an effective strategy for her, given what you know about her?
Yes, because I think she wants, she wants the other person to know how she feels about something, and her feelings are valid, and
Yes.
it's and how she would say it is not in an angry way, but she would just go up there and she would just, clearly say, look, I've been standing
Yes.
here. I deserve to be, waited on next, and that type. That's the way she is. That's
Yes.
what she would do.
But I bet
Beautiful.
that's not what I just acted out. What I
No,
Yes.
no, but you wouldn't you wouldn't
exactly
do
what you
that.
did. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not you.
Well,
You wouldn't do that. You would do it in a very intellectual way.
No, I wouldn't. You know what that sound means? This is where we are going to stop for today. But this uncommon conversation is far from over, very far. We're just getting started, but there is so much to unpack already. First, though, many thanks, Asante Sana, to Dr. Howard Stevenson for discussing the racial literacy and how to handle the stress of racial or racist encounters. This is so important because every black person in America has or will experience a racially charged situation at some point in their lives. Yes, I stand by that statement. If you disagree, you can send me a message to voice that opinion, but I stand by that statement. Dr. Stevenson stressed the importance of talking about race and the problems that are caused when we fail to do so, as a country, as a society, as a community, and even as parents. No, it's not an easy talk to have, but it's an important one, a necessary one. Let me back up for a moment. We opened this great discussion with the African proverb, "The lion's story will never be told if the hunter is the one to tell it." I first heard that proverb from Dr. Stevenson, and I'm so glad that I asked him about it. It applies to so many different situations, but particularly about the issue of race, and one's real experience as a Black person living in an anti-Black environment. Dr. Stevenson's response and explanation of it just took it to a different level, though, and so I really, really appreciate him discussing that. Dr. Stevenson also explained the terms racial literacy, racial self-efficacy, and racial socialization. Very, very important terms, but they're not just words to memorize. They're important ways of learning to identify one's feelings and to find an effective way to respond to racial stress and trauma. Dr. Stevenson also brought out and asked a couple of questions, which I think are really important. He asked, "Do you think it's important to discuss race and racism?" And we know his answer to that, and I completely agree that we should. "Do you think that Americans discuss race enough, or do you think we discuss it too much?" I'm really interested in your response to that. "And should children be discussing race?" Again, I'm very, very interested to hear your response to that, so please don't hold back. I'd love to know what you think. Well, whether we openly discuss it or not, Dr. Stevenson noted that the body will respond in some way. In my case, I was shaking just thinking about the racial encounter that I had experienced in the department store. Just like Professor William Smith said a few weeks ago about racial battle fatigue, the body is a human lie detector. I think I kind of played it down a little bit, but my body was saying something different, so it wasn't going to let me get away with it, and I shouldn't ignore that. The body knows when we're not being truthful about our feelings, and it responds. Dr. Stevenson further noted that the body keeps score. It does not just let go of or get over a racially stressed encounter, despite what the mind is saying. The body keeps a score that begins to accumulate. And those cumulative effects can be anxiety, they can cause depression, or they can even cause cardiovascular disease, and even worse. This should not be dismissed or taken lightly. It's real and it's serious. We should not just avoid talking about the racial elephant in the room anymore. Fortunately, there's something we can do. We're not helpless, and the situation is not hopeless. In addition to the strategies that Dr. Stevenson already discussed in this show about communication, racial self-efficacy, and socialization, next week, Dr. Stevenson will discuss certain coping skills. It kind of all connects together. Certain coping skills that can mitigate the effects of racial stress and trauma. Do you like storytelling? Well, I really hope so, because it can be a powerful tool against racial stress and racial encounters. But I won't get ahead of the discussion. Let's save it for next week. I did promise that I would read a paragraph from Dr. Stevenson's book, Promoting Racial Literacy in Schools, Differences That Make a Difference. It really is an excellent book, and there is so much to discuss in it. That's why the Espresso Talk Today team will read and discuss excerpts from this book soon on Clubhouse. We'll let you know when that's going to happen. But for today, we've selected a paragraph about racial firsts. Being the first Black person to accomplish a certain goal. The first Black Victorian out of school, the first Black president, the first Black person to win Wimbledon, the first Black woman vice president, or the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. Big shout out to the Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson. In this excerpt, We will be talking about Jackie Robinson. Let's begin the book excerpt now, which will be read by Elder Mel.
Anti-villain. The stress on Jackie Robinson was so enormous that some touted as a contribution to his untimely death at the early age of 53. Is the stress of being the racial first too costly? The stress on Jackie Robinson was not so much about being the first Black baseball player, but the first Black person to demonstrate the defectiveness of racial segregation. So, although playing baseball well was a requirement, he also had to prove that he wasn't a stereotype. The role of hero was off limits. The role of villain represented failure. Being the anti-villain was his only choice. If he resisted and fought back too hard against racial rejection and violence thrown at him, he would have become the villain in the eyes of whiteness. If he tried to lead the entire nation through assertive but positive anti-racist statements of American unity and pride, he would have had no followers and would have been attacked for speaking for everyone, a position that only a hero could occupy. One premise of the debilitating effects of racial stress is that the sacrificial role of anti-villain remains an essential part of an unhealthy dance as people of color today try to prove that they are not the stereotypes projected upon them. Sadly, many administrators, teachers, and students of colors in predominantly white schools, PWSs, are the Jackie Robinsons of their time for those schools. They are the first, and the pressures on their academic, physical, and emotional health in being the anti-villain is painful to watch. I can't tell you how many persons of color working and learning in PWSs, predominantly white schools, have told me how their physical health has been compromised by being the first, the few, the only, or the lonely.
As you can hear, there is so much in this book that needs to be discussed, and the Espresso Talk Today team is really looking forward to discussing the issues in this book and sharing its coping mechanisms to help Black people live healthier and happier lives. At Espresso Talk Today, we are a vibrant community of amiable intellectuals who are passionate about issues affecting Black people. Community and health are very important to us, and that's why we're so happy that Dr. Stevenson joined us today to discuss these issues. They're important, and they could save lives. We hope that you enjoyed today's show, and we hope that you will return to hear more of the discussion with Dr. Stevenson as he presents practical coping mechanisms for dealing with racial stress encounters and racial trauma. You definitely do not want to miss that show. We'll let you know when the discussions will happen on Clubhouse. You can also get more information on the Espresso Talk Today Instagram page. Remember to send your thoughts and comments to us at team@espressotalktoday.com. Thanks again to Dr. Howard Stevenson and to the Espresso Talk Today community for coming through today. And remember, strength, soul, and reparations. Asante Sana. Bye for now.